Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review the original Rocky film. So, regardless of how I feel about this movie, I would have to probably say that one, this movie was actually not all 100% thought up by Stallone. There was an actual boxer that had inspired this film, and we find out years later that boxer had not only done one but two uh, stories inspired by his true life. And so immediately when I go into this film, I also think of that other boxer that probably didn't get enough credit. Because it's true. Like, they had to kind of go into certain things later on and kind of say it's like, well, yeah, technically he was, yeah, technically uh, he did have some kind of helping of Stallone come up with this movie. So it kind of takes some credit away from this film or away from this franchise or whatever, but still, when really also looking at it, Stallone inspired a lot of people. Whether it was to be writers of a movie that wanted to star in it themselves because they would look at Stallone as that comparison. A lot of people would go on and just be inspired by Rocky to become boxers, professional athletes, or go on to possibly be actors for whatever reason. So, going into this movie, regardless of how I will go and dissect it and break it all down and just say how I feel about it, I feel that this movie can always be an enjoyable piece that anyone would go into. And I think probably I could watch this movie 100 times and have 100 different reviews of it completely. Where I could say that, like, oh, like, hey, the first time I've ever watched this in its completion, I probably would have told you that it's a great underdog story and that there are parts in here where Stallone is to really just talk about that no one cared about him, or that uh, he's probably not going to win this match, but he's going to just try and go the distance and so on and so forth. That no one is going to be picking him to win this thing, and so on and so, like, there's stuff like that in this movie where it's just like, man, that is to really like invest in this character to just enjoy this journey. Enjoy the journey of this character. But with that said, also, there. So, like, there's that point when I could watch this in its first ever completion. Because I think usually I would go into this movie and I would watch the tail end of it. I would watch the boxing match, and I don't think I've ever really fully watched this in its completion until once before. And so now I would probably come in here watching this movie, I don't know how many times now. Probably not in its completion, but I would watch it of plenty. And watching it from start to finish right now, I would say that there's stuff about this that there are some annoying spots. There are some annoying characters. There are some characters um, that I wish that there would have been like something more about them. I wish we could have had uh, some more things of these characters. There are certain times where it just kind of feels that you have these characters just coming up with these stories from out of nowhere. And that's to just stretch out this movie quite a bit. And that's all this movie has. It's just like a person coming up with seemingly a billion stories. And that's every character. But, and I say but, like overall, this movie is an enjoyable experience. And this movie also is to give us a character that we would probably compare ourselves to a lot. That when Stallone is to get this shot, and he's like, no, like he's like, no, I don't deserve this, like, and that's interesting. That like Rocky is just like, yeah, like I'm in the prime of my life, and yeah, I definitely should have gotten this shot X amount of time ago. Like he's like, no, I don't want this. Like I'll spar with Creed. Like I don't think I should get this, and that's the cool part. That's the thing that I enjoy is this character not thinking that he's good enough. Because really this was just a shot in the dark kind of thing. Because Apollo needed someone, which you kind of wonder if Apollo's character was to be built as a character that probably didn't train all that well this time around, or probably wasn't really all that focused on Balboa at all, to where Balboa's trainer is like, "Hey man, you should check this guy out," and Apollo's like, "Yeah, I'll do something later. I'll look at something later. Like I don't really care. This guy's going down in 3 rounds, and like man, I don't have to do much work for this guy." And then Apollo is to come back and realize that. Apollo was to realize he didn't train hard enough. That Rocky was hungry. And so once we get through this series, and then Apollo is to train Rocky to then not be like Apollo and to become that hungry boxer again, to become that hungry fighter that is to take on characters like eventually whoever is to be Mr. T in the later films. Because freaking Rocky gets freaking clocked in that film, gets freaking knocked his butt down. And so then Rocky has to kind of find himself again because he has gone through so many of these fights, spent too much time with Apollo, and realized that he has become this boxer that has kind of been going at it fairly easily because Mick will tell him that. That Mick will say, like, yeah, like all those fighters, they weren't really ready, but like, we fed them to you anyways. That kind of thing. So that's the kind of interesting thing about this film is the progression of this character. Maybe you might not like the very first Rocky film, but then at some point you might enjoy other Rocky films. The thing that we can also enjoy about this film is that Rocky, like, for how, like, he was, for whatever he was to do, whether he was to be a boxer or whether he was to be a loan shark kind of guy, where he was to just be like, okay, like, the debt's paid or I'm going to break your fingers. For how small bits and whatever that Rocky was to get paid for everything that he did. Like, that's the kind of real sad thing is when, like, this guy is to be, like, like boxing and beating people up, and he probably gets like 40 some odd dollars for that. It's like, like probably $40 to go and get freaking knocked out or nose bled or any number of things, broken nose, so on and so forth. And you get like 40 some odd dollars for that, or maybe more. That's ridiculous. So, with that said, or there's some people that just kind of fight for charity, hoping that they'll go and they'll get picked up somewhere. So that kind of sucks too, where it's like you got guys who are doing kind of a number of exhibition fights, so that way they'll get somewhere. They'll get somewhere that'll actually pay them money. So, with that said, I think that's all that I want to say about Rocky. There's this back and forth with me of just like, I can enjoy this movie at some other watchings. In this watching, I can also say that like some annoying characters in this one. Um, I don't know. I just don't like. Paulie comes off as a really like much character because he has to be. Um, because he is to be kind of pushing these characters, especially uh, Adrian to come out of her closet, so to speak, in a metaphorical like way, to like be present, to be there, and that there is one guy who is just kind of waiting for this girl, and she is to just be kind of like dead silent towards him. So that's kind of the interesting thing about certain characters. Like, you get Rocky, who is to just be this kind of maybe not well spoken character, and maybe that's the only annoying thing about this character, about Rocky, is he's just not well spoken or whatever. But who is? Who really is well spoken? Not me, that's for sure. But with that not well spoken nature of Rocky, there still is those poetic like parts of this character that you just kind of have to deal with the jargon or the way that he goes into things with hey oh hey like, where I'm just like, how many times does he have to kind of go into something? But maybe that's just the way that the culture of people where he was from was to talk. Maybe that's just the way he approached things. I don't know how many times that I would probably say words that are to be repetitive and whatever, so. But going into this, enjoyable film. Enjoyable film. Um, a film in bits and pieces you can like, you can enjoy. You can see how Rocky, even though things bothered him, he wouldn't tell people. Because, like, for him, he's probably having to swallow a lot. Because this is a great opportunity, that this is a once in a lifetime thing, that things are going to work out for him finally, that people are throwing money at him to do training, and people believe in him for once. So he's having to swallow things, even if it's him swallowing his own pride. So with that said, let's go to that double 5 time territory, because it's about that customary time yet again to go into spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this movie. I want to probably say right off the bat, I'm probably going to try as best as possible to keep it like the way the movie is to present this film, but I also know that I feel like there's another roundabout way of reviewing this coming out also. Where it's like me just trying to like scrape through and get certain events and certain things and whatever I deem to be the most important that's going to be missed here. Like I think right away, like some kind of training kind of parts or parts where Rocky is obviously just running up that Philadelphia place, making it to those uh, museum like buildings, and then him just kind of holding his hands up high and like, yeah, yeah, I made it, I did it, I ran, so on and so forth. Like that'll of course be lost upon me because I'd rather just focus on the character or the story or the driven parts and whichever. So there might be something here where I completely just don't bother to go into just because I don't feel like it's important enough to second by second cover this film. So, with that said, the beginning of this film is to start with Spider Rico and Balboa fighting it out for seemingly like 40 to 60 bucks. And I'm like, oh my god. It's like, could you imagine just permanently like hurting your body? Like, say if you broke a rib in this boxing match like this and you have 40 bucks to your name, you're just like, wow, it feels so worth it. But hey, like, if you want to get into the business, if you want to like, if you want to do anything, if you want to be a wrestler, if you want to be whatever, like, you probably will have to pay people to have them toss you around, and you're going to have to pay people to have them beat you up, to keep you going, to keep you, to have stamina, and keep you conditioned, and keep you ready for those times. So, like, look at karate. Like, karate, you get kicked and punched and whatever, and you pay them to do that. So, like, when really looking at it, I guess 40 to 60 bucks is actually a reasonable thing because actually you're getting something out of it. But anyways, so Rocky is to, of course, fight Spider Rico, and so Rocky is to supposedly knock Spider Rico out. Like, it kind of looks weird because we have like Spider Rico who just kind of falls onto the ropes, and so Rocky is just kind of punch him down, and there isn't a 10 count. We just have where the ref just goes on and just like, hey, Rocky won. And I'm like, okay, that's kind of weird. So Rocky is to go off and go back in the back, whether it's to be some other fighter just kind of talking to him. So, if honestly, I would have liked to have probably watched this movie with subtitles. I don't know why. It's starting to like be where I'm like accustomed to watch movies with subtitles, to where I feel like there's some audio or some stuff that doesn't feel like I can quite understand everything. So I feel like there's sometimes where I just want to watch movies in subtitles for whatever goofy reason. I started to just come accustomed to it to where it's like when I don't have it, it's like I want to know every single word that anyone says. So at any second. So Rocky is to get his payout as well as the other boxer. So Rocky is to go to the normal place where he is to get trained. And so he goes to this place to get trained, and so he finds out that the combination of his locker has been changed. And so Rocky goes to the guy that kind of is to be one of the people that works there, and he's like, "Hey, like you guys gave away my locker?" And so the guy's like, "Well, yeah, like we put your stuff on Skid Row." And he's like, "Why? Like I've had this locker for 6 years. Why did you get rid of my?" So they're like, "Well, hey, you gotta talk to Mick about that." So Rocky's just like, "Okay, sure." So Rocky, of course, goes to Mick, and Mick is to explain that he decided to go off and give his locker to a guy named Dipper, because Dipper is actually a contender. Dipper is to be the guy that Mick is to focus all of his time on. And so Rocky is to say, it's like, well, hey, like I fought last night and like I beat the guy that I fought. And Mick is just like, well, yeah, that's great, but you're a bum. Like, like you fought a nobody, you're a bum. I'm like, oh my god. Plus, also Mick is like, hey, like I also don't like I don't want to have any charity cases here, and you're one of those, because I guess like Rocky is to be this guy who's to be this loan shark, and he's to not really be a fighter. And so that's the real reason why Mickey doesn't want to train him anyways, because he is to mainly be a loan shark, not a boxer. So we have Rocky, who is to, of course, go to these docks and is to go to a guy who is to owe a man $200. That man is Gazzo. So Rocky goes to this man, I think his name is Rob, which weirdly Rocky didn't know the name of this guy. So he was to go and break this guy's thumbs, but he didn't even know what his name was. It's kind of weird. So Rocky goes on and is to say, like, hey, you owe my boss $200. And the guy is like, well, all I have is 130 on me. Like, hey, take my coat. That should be about like $50 there. And so Rocky is like, no, I need the 200. And so Rocky does not break this guy's thumbs like he's supposed to. But then Rocky goes and gives Gazzo the $130, and that the guy will probably be good for it. And so Gazzo's like, you know, Rocky, let me go. Let's talk. So they go off to the side. They talk. Gazzo is to mention, like, hey man, you didn't break this guy's fingers. You didn't break this guy's thumb like I told you to. And so Rocky's like, well, hey, the guy's good for it. Like, you know, like he'll pay the money. And I think Gazzo is to just say here that if he goes light on people, that no one is going to pay up. That they'll just ask for another extension. They'll ask for more time. They'll ask for, because Rocky will give it to him, because he won't torture them. He won't hurt them. And so Rocky is to say, well, like, if this guy ends up breaking his thumb, he'll probably get laid off. And so how are you going to get the money then? It's like, that's the whole point of just breaking his finger. The guy can possibly get his finger unbroken or whatever, but still. But yeah, so Gazzo is just telling Rocky, it's like, well, hey, like, do what I ask you to do. So hence why Rocky is just desperately just like, God, I don't want to do this no more. I don't want to be a loan shark for the rest of my life. And so, and that's the funny part because Rocky is to go off and make his way back home and talk about this certain kind of food that evidently he is to feed to his turtle. That there's be moths and flies and something in it. And so Rocky is to try and do this whole speech because he's preparing it to go on and talk to Adrian and tell her this story. And while he's preparing for it, he looks at himself in the mirror and sees an old photo of himself. And when he looks in the mirror, he's like, who even cares? That's the interesting thing, where you have a lot of characters that like will put so much effort into something, and then immediately a second later you'll just be like, who cares? Why did I do this? Why did I put so much effort into something? Like, you have that always like questioning of yourself that comes with every single thing. You always have that like, man, this is probably a unique idea and everyone will love it. Like, man, I'm sure like it'll just be like the greatest hit of tomorrow, that everybody's chiming away, that everybody's to love this one idea. And yeah, this is the most unique idea, and everybody like, wow, why didn't anyone else ever thought of that? God dang it, man, that's great. That's the greatest idea I've ever heard in your life. You would think that that could have always ever been a possibility in your life, that that kind of thing would happen. But then you would also realistically have a better idea that people are going to downplay it or downright hate it. That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. Because you would think that it's easier for people to hate something than to like it. So that's Rocky looking into the mirror and saying, like, who cares? Because Rocky is to be supposedly a very forgettable character, which Rocky is to force people to not forget about him or to not care about him, and to force people to just like, hey, I want this, so I'm going to finally just say, I freaking want this. Let's do this. Let's get this. Let's have this now. Because I desperately have been wanting this for so long. So let's have this finally be a thing in our lives. Kind of like me with YouTube. Like, me was just like at first it was just like, we'll see what happens with this. We'll see where this goes. And then it's like now it's like put in the work to make this thing that I have really just fallen in love with. Like, let's get this to go somewhere. And it doesn't matter that it's to be a billion, bajillion, whatever, subs, views, whatever. It's just that I want to put in the work to get my full enjoyment out of this. So Rocky goes on to have this speech prepared to go and talk to Adrian, and he's met with metaphorical crickets. Adrian says nothing. And it's just like, oh my god. Because we just, like, I think Rocky is trying to get his confidence up to talk to Adrian, but then later on, he's like, we finally realize, because Rocky has to say this to Polly, that he's like, hey, yo, I've gone in the number of times and I've talked to this girl, and like, she says nothing. I'm talking to a wall, and the. And I'm like, oh, so this, like, he's done this numerous times. This isn't like his first shot at this. Like, oh, okay. Like, so now, like, you can understand his possible frustration. But so, Rocky is to go into this pet shop and start talking to a number of these animals. And Rocky is to have also, like, turtles and stuff like that, and fish and whatever all in his place. Which is so interesting because he had probably just gone into that store to purposely just buy a number of fish and turtles and whatever to try and win this girl over for whatever reason. So, Rocky is to go and supposedly buy this turtle feed, and he is to try to make this somewhat joke, which it really didn't work. So Rocky is like, well, I'll come back and I'll try and I'll make up another joke and I'll come back, and where it's like, oh my god, oh boy. So Rocky is to leave this pet store with, I guess, not even paying for this, like, turtle food, because Rocky's to leave just saying, like, crime doesn't pay, and so he walks off. And so that's shortly thereafter he goes and tries to break the thumbs of this one guy, and so on and so forth. So we have Rocky going with a guy named Paulie, and Paulie is to consistently ask Rocky if there's any jobs for him to work with Gazzo. Because, like, hey man, like, I can break people's bones, I can ask for people's money, and so on and so forth. And you would have thought here that Rocky would have really been honest to Gazzo, or to Paulie, about Gazzo, to just say, like, why Rocky is just consistently refusing to have Paulie do that job. Because it seems that Rocky is the first mention to Paulie. It's like, well, hey, like, no, like Gazzo doesn't really have work for anybody right now. And so, but Paulie used to just keep on asking, to where the point later on in the film, Rocky is to just keep having Paulie asking for some kind of job, because Paulie just wants to get out of the meat packing business. And so Rocky is to say, it's like, well, hey, like, why don't you just stay here in the meat packing business? It's like, what's so wrong about being a meat packer? So, but at one point later on in the film, Stallone or Rocky's to mention that Paulie is to ask for some job, and Rocky's just kind of running out of, like, things to tell Paulie, that Rocky doesn't really understand what he can really do for Paulie. And then Paulie kind of is to be frustrated and just be like, well, I don't want anything from you. So, like, as if, like, Rocky is gonna figure out how to get Paulie out of the job that he's doing. Like, it's just not going to work. So, like, Paulie's even asking if Rocky needs, like a water guy, or someone to just kind of like hold his gear for him or something like that when like Rocky's to go off into the ring or something. So, which I think later that's what actually Paulie does. Like he goes out there and he's kind of one of uh, Rocky's guys that kind of bring him out to the ring, kind of. So later on in the other films. So we have where Rocky is to go to Paulie and say like, "Hey man, like I really want to like date your sister and she's just giving me the cold shoulder. Like I don't know what it is. Like do I stink or something? Like what's wrong with me?" So Polly is to say like, "Well, hey, how about you come to my house during Thanksgiving and like we'll have you two go out somewhere. It'll be great." And so on and so forth. So Stallone goes off and is to, of course, meet certain people in the streets. And we have these kind of guys who are singing their do 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 do, bring it back, or whatever goofy song that they're singing. And so Rocky's like, "Hey, you know what? You guys get better every year." So, funny enough, I think one of those singers is actually Stallone's brother. I think it's credited somewhere on IMDb. So, Stallone is to also find this one girl in seemingly the middle of the street somewhere, and it's to just pull her off to the side, and it's to mention it's like, you know what? There's something about you that is to kind of just make you come off as some kind of like I don't want to say it, but whore. So he used to go and mention it's like, well, hey, there's probably not gonna even people who probably remember your even name, but they'll just remember your rep. That you just come off as this kind of girl. So maybe you should think about that when you're kind of going and doing what you're doing. So after Stallone or after Rocky's to give this kind of advice to this one girl, we when Stallone is to walk this girl home, Stallone is to call Rocky this creepo, and she walks off, or she like kind of slams her door behind her, and Rocky's just like, "Well, yeah, creepo, what are you even giving people advice for?" And he walks off, just going like, "Yeah, like," because there's a lot of times where a lot of people, random people, will give you these like life advice kind of things, and like their life hasn't really gone and won them $1 million either, but they'll kind of turn around and just be like, well, I'm just older than you, I'm just experienced, and it's like, well, yeah, but like when really looking at it, like the world has completely changed from what it was X amount of decades ago. Like now we have social distancing, and now we have this, and now we have that, and now there's so many people that are to treat the world vastly different than what it really was. And so now there are people that still feel that, like, well, there's plenty of advice that I can give you. And it's just like, well, for what really? To layer up? What can you tell me what to wear during a hot or cold day? Because you could probably tell me that. You would probably know that. You'd probably have advice for that, life advice for weather, because everything else has changed. So, Rocky is to make his way to Thanksgiving at Polly's house. And so, both Rocky and Polly make their way to Polly's house, and Rocky is to consistently ask Polly, like, well, hey, like, Adrian knows I'm coming, right? She, like, knows that, like, I'm going to be here, correct? And Polly's like, sure, sure, she's so excited that you're coming here. She can't wait for you to come. Like, she's been talking about it all day. And so when Rocky and Polly make it to this place, Adrian is to just be all flustered and all just be like running and kind of hiding away. And so Polly is just tell Adrian, like, what are you doing? Like, why are you hiding away? Like, why are you going into your room and trying to just hide away from all this? And Polly's like, well, or Polly, Adrian's like, well, I wasn't prepared for it. I wasn't prepared for this. I'm like, yeah. So, like, Rocky was desperately asking, like, Polly, like, hey, like, Adrian knows I'm coming, right? And Adrian actually had no clue. So, Polly is to force Adrian to get out, to just go out, live her life. Go and like Adrian is coming up with excuses. Well, I have to cook the turkey. I have to cook this. I have to make this. I have to blah blah blah. So Polly ends up going and taking the whole turkey and chucking it out the door and to really just in a metaphorical way just telling Adrian like go out somewhere, like even if it's out the door to get this chicken, do something. So Polly is to grab like a turkey leg and start eating it, and so Polly's like, hey Rock, you want some chicken, you want some turkey? So Adrian is to be in her room, and so Rocky is to just now just come up with some way, in a nice way, to have Adrian just like, could you please just give me the honor of just like coming with me to go somewhere, and like I'll try to be as nice and as gentleman as I can so we can go somewhere. Because Rocky has really just decided that Adrian is the only girl for him, and so like that's what he's just cemented, that like they are going to be a couple. So Rocky is trying in the nicest way possible to tell Adrian like, hey, let's go out, I'll be nice and whatever. So Adrian is to go on and put her Sunday best on, which it's kind of interesting to kind of see in one fell swoop of a film kind of the drastic change of this character, where it seems like she's to kind of wear these clothes that seem like she's like, in all honesty, like at first like what she kind of wears makes her look like a grandmother, but then the more and more like we see this character within this film, she changes her clothes, changes her attire to look much younger and to look much more uh like designer wise, I guess, interesting or whatever, youthful and kind of like very much more colorful and so on and so forth. So Rocky and Adrian go off to this ice rink, and so the guy who is to be in this kind of Zamboni is say, hey man, it's Thanksgiving, like we're closed. And so Rocky's like, well, do you mean closed for the general public? Or do you mean just kind of like, what do you mean closed? So now Rocky is trying to bargain with this guy, mentioning like, well, hey, can we have the rink for like 10 minutes? For like $10, we can have the rink for 10 minutes. I think he dwindles it down for like $9 or whatever. But so Adrian has put skates on, and Rocky is to just like kind of like slide behind her basically, because he's kind of like slipping and almost tripping and almost falling over at some points. while he's to kind of walk beside her. But like he's to weirdly, because for me, I can't like rollerblade or I'm sure ice skate or whatever. So and plus for me, I'm like I'm not gonna be falling on my butt anytime soon. Like I don't think I want to go and try anything that's gonna have me go and fall on my batukas unless it's something uh really and truly legitimately like something that's not going to be like, hey, roller skating, how about you go and crack your head open? Well, for me, I have a very thick skull anyways, but still, um I would just be like, yeah, I just want to fall on my butt all day long. Just fall over like more times than I'm actually like upward. Plus also blades on your feet. I'm sorry, I'm not going to stab myself anytime soon. That's why I'm just like bravo to freaking hockey players because man, they live dangerously with freaking blades coming at them at any point in time in their life. Freaking anybody could get freaking knifed accidentally by some blade somewhere, get freaking cut. I don't know how anybody would justify being a hockey player for whatever, because you could get easily cut at any point in time in your life, because accidents do happen. But anyways, so Rocky is just kind of is to talk about uh, really just his fights, because that's all he can really talk about. Uh, talk about how he won his other fight with Spider Rico. He's talking about his kind of his injuries and so on and so forth. He talks about that his nose has never been broken, and I'm just like, this is just some like, man. I'm sure like Adrian is just like, yeah, like I'm loving all this boxing talk. Yeah, that's gonna get me so like in the mood. To just be loving on Rocky. Just tell me more that you've just like cut yourself or had gotten clobbered or whatever. Like that your nose hasn't been broken. Yeah. Just tell me that story. I don't know. It's so weird. But so Stallone is just to kind of talk about his uh like the story of which where his father says is like, well, hey, like you're not gonna sing and you can't dance, so you might as well just like work out and be a fighter because like you got nothing else left to do. And so it's kind of funny because we have a combination of brains and bronze because Rocky is the kind of the muscle or the bronze in this situation, and Adrian is to have her mother tell her that it's like, well, hey, like you're not going to be too pretty, so you might as well be smart. So we kind of have these like polar opposite kind of characters with the brain and the bronze kind of combination. Opposites, I guess, do attract, and so you have these characters kind of meeting in the middle here. So with this whole kind of dialogue and so on and so forth, and so Rocky, after this whole time of which on the ice they go off and they don't go anywhere to eat. That's the one thing that I think that they should have gone and done, but they didn't. So Rocky just takes Adrian to his place, and so Rocky is to just kind of bring up stories about like, hey, remember when I was in the store with you and I bought these? Like, hey, remember that? So Adrian was like, "But yeah, like I was there. Like I was that that was me. Like I remember that whole story." So But yeah, so Rocky goes on and eventually is to try to, one way or the other, win over Adrian and like get her to be closer to him, and of course kiss him, and like Adrian is to see this like young picture of Stallone, and is to see like certain pictures and stuff like that uh, of Rocky's family and so on and so forth. And so, and of course, they kiss, and that cements that they're going to be a couple. And so, right after that, we have all of a sudden Apollo, who is to need a fighter because I guess his fighter uh, was to, I guess, get hurt. And so it seems like there is nobody in the world that wants to fight Apollo Creed because, of course, he's a very scary and an intimidating man. Freaking Carl Weathers is a very scary and an intimidating man because he freaking went on to do Star Wars. Freaking heck yeah. So, or also Predator for a lot of people. So, Apollo Creed is to, like, hey man, like, you guys can easily just find me someone to fight. And they're like, no, there's a guy who is to possibly have been a contender, but, like, he went off to say that he's, like, retiring and he gained 50 pounds. And so, like, they're to, like, come up with, like, yeah, there's nobody that really wants to fight you. And Apollo's like, well, yeah, because I'll just beat all of them. Like, they're scared, and so on and so forth. So, now, Apollo is to just think, it's like, well, how about this? How about we just find a nobody? Like, how about we just find a guy that's white as snow, and we just go and we just get him and just have him fight against me because who cares? Like, we'll just get whoever, and like we'll just get some money around him because like what better way to have Apollo Creed just be this like generous person to just kind of fight this nobody, and people probably love him for it. So they're thumbing through and they're trying to find who it is that they could possibly have fight Apollo Creed. And so it seems that Apollo Creed is not even looking to see like if this person's a southpaw or whatever. And so, as well as Stallone with that whole ice rink scene, he has, excuse me, he has to explain southpaw, like that they're all left-handers, and so on and so forth. So we have to have Apollo explain that who he's going to choose. And it seems that Rocky Balboa is to take up this name, the Italian Stallion. And so Apollo's to now have to justify that name. Like, Italian Stallion? Like, man, that sounds great. Sounds like Apollo versus Italian Stallion. It sounds like a monster movie. This sounds great. So, plus also, like, Creed is to mention that I guess an Italian had found America, so what better way to go back into tradition by having an Italian come and face the champion? So, like, Creed is just building this up all in his head, just getting all this kind of rattling off all this information. So, they're like, okay, sure, like, this guy is some nobody, so, like, this just might just, hey, another championship bout. Like, this will just draw money anyways. It's kind of like WrestleMania, where a lot of people will say that, like, oh, well, certain people are, like, the draw. Like, if you have one person on this card, that'll make it all worth it for everyone to come in. It's like, well, no, like, WrestleMania is the draw. Like putting a world title on the line is the draw. It's not who is to be in that match. It just matters that the championship is to be on the line, and the players could change and it wouldn't matter. Like if you had a completely vacant title and two people were to fight over it, it would still be as interesting as someone who had held that title for X amount of days, so on and so forth. So Apollo is to, of course, pick Rocky, and so now Rocky is to go on and have this fight promoter tell him that Apollo is to be interested in having Balboa fight for this title. Because when this fight promoter is to go to Balboa, Balboa is to mention, it's like, well, hey, like, it'll be great if he needs a sparring partner, and I could really go and try to do my best to be his sparring partner. And his fight promoter is like, kid, that's not what he wants. It's like he wants you in the ring fighting against him for the world title. And Rocky's like, no, I don't want that. like no, like that's insane. Like this guy is the world champion. Like there's no way I'm gonna want this title. So, and it's funny because like Apollo Creed doesn't like try to like dog this guy either, to like push him to like, yeah, you're gonna fight me. Like what is he gonna do? Is he gonna like threaten his girlfriend or something? Is he gonna just dog him? Like it's kind of like, what is it, the one movie where I think it was the fifth one, where they have that whole like street fighting thing, where we have like the one fight promoter like consistently going after Rocky, like just dogging him and just like, hey, your son sucks, your wife sucks, your everybody sucks. fight machine gun, whatever the guy's name was, Gun or something like that, for the fifth one, whatever the street fighting one was, where like supposedly Rocky wasn't even like medically cleared to fight, but they're like, fight me anyways, I don't care. Like we get to that escalation of things where like somebody's just to like ridicule Balboa so badly into pushing him to fight. Like people are telling him that he needs to fight for whatever goofy reason that doesn't even make sense anymore. Like in Rocky Balboa uh, with the young boxer, and like they keep comparing and whatever to Balboa. To all of a sudden Balboa is like, well, I guess I should probably go and fight. Like, like might as well, right? So kind of like for the Jake Gyllenhaal movie, like Southpaw, where like Jake Gyllenhaal was going to take some time off between fights, but there's this one guy who's just like, no, man, we need to fight. And I'm just going to keep showing up at places and heckling you until you fight me. And then Jake is just like, make the match happen, make the fight happen, I want to fight this guy. But then his wife is like, no, let's take some time off. And then Jake Gyllenhaal's like coming to his senses, like, yeah, I'm going to go and take some time off. So, Rocky is to go on and do these like press junkets. And so he's not like saying all kinds of, like, he's not throwing dirt or shade into Apollo Creed to just be like, yeah, like he chose the wrong hombre to come in here. No, he's just like, hey man, Apollo's a great fighter, and, and I'm going to do my best, and so on and so forth. And so we have Rocky who's kind of like being nice about this, and like Apollo is kind of like treating like Rocky, like he's just another boxer. He's just another guy that they found somewhere in a basement somewhere or something. So, and kind of like making fun of him because he's Italian and whatever and all that goofy kind of stuff that they say about him. And so when uh but the main focus is that Rocky is to kind of shout out his like his baby, his woman, his lady, and so while like he's at home watching this interview with Adrian, and she's like, "Oh my God, you mentioned me," and he's like, "Well, of course I did, like of course," which is kind of a nice thing. Like you have like some like professional athletes that kind of do shout out their ladies at some point. Like we have like CM Punk that from time to time keeps like going and doing certain kind of speeches, and he like shouts out like AJ Lee consistently during his promos, which is a nice thing to do because AJ Lee is off doing whatever she's doing now. So like, but it's just kind of nice that he does shouts out to his wife, and so like that's the interesting thing about these characters, and that's what I think like made this couple so interesting was just because a lot of times like for Rocky, once Rocky was to have Adrian with him, like it wasn't all just about Rocky. It became Rocky and Adrian, and how a lot of times Adrian is the only thing that mattered to him after he got her. And then once he was to have a son, then it became like Adrian and his son, and how all that became important to him. So that was kind of interesting with this character. I'm gonna have to pause here for a second. Let me charge my tablet thing here. All right. So after that whole interview, and after kind of Paulie was to mention that like Creed was making fun of Rocky, and Rocky didn't say anything. So Rocky was just like, "Oh man, like yeah, he's just like promoting this fight. He's just trying to put things together." And so Rocky's mentioned that it didn't bother him. So then eventually, when Rocky walks out of Paulie's place, then Rocky's to tell the truth that what Creed did say did bother him. And it's like, well, hey, use it in the fight. Drive yourself to become this better boxer, because no one is to think that you're going to go toe to toe with this guy. Everybody's guaranteeing. Creed is saying Creed in 3. That's what he's saying. That's who he is to be in this match, to say that, oh, I'm going to knock this guy out in 3 rounds. It's going to happen. Guaranteed. So, now that there's some televisation or some television with Rocky promoting this match, everybody's starting to get buzz on. So, like, hey, why is it Balboa being chosen? So, all of a sudden, we have Mick, who is to just say that Rocky is a bum. Now, all of a sudden, once he ends up getting this fight opportunity, Mick is to come to Rocky's place to be like, hey, Mick, or hey, Rocky, I want to train you. I want to be a manager because, if anything, things didn't go well for me because I didn't have a manager, and so on and so forth. And Rocky's like, yeah. Like, like, I'm sure, like, I'm going to do so poorly because they won't have somebody behind me that's watching me and training me and whatever. So, but Rocky is to be so ticked off at Mick because it's like, where were you? Where were you when I wanted training from you? And you couldn't be bothered because you were looking at so many other people You're looking at so many other supposed people that you said that I wasn't a contender and they were. Look at me now. Where were you then? And now all of a sudden now that I'm on television and I'm gonna do this fight, now you're gonna be behind me now and you're gonna train me now and now you're gonna uh, help me now. To where Rocky is to just be so upset when Mick is to just be like walking away saying like, hey man, I could be your manager, and then like Rocky is to just be like, where were you? So when Mick is to continue to walk off, Rocky is to just go and run after him and is to just like, you know what, like, fine, like, let's do this, let's shake hands on it, fine, you'll be my trainer because Rocky has no one else. Like, that's the kind of sad thing about this character is that Rocky has to be a person that is to consistently settle with things. Settle with the person he needs to fall in love with, settle with uh, who he is to get managed by, or really, like, to him, he might not think of it as settling. He might just think of, like I wanted this and I'm going to break this person down until I get what I want, kind of thing. Because Rocky was to want Adrian and he had gone so far to get this girl and he got her. Mick was to have called Rocky a bum, but Rocky had just been like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to go on TV and I'm going to have the champion of the world coming to my doorstep and I'm just going to break you down and want you to manage me instead of you calling me a bum. So now Rocky is to have Mick in his corner and Mick stays with him for pretty much the rest of Mick's life, sadly. So, because Mick in this story is to mention his age and that he probably won't get another opportunity to manage a world champion. So we we push on here, and so Balboa is to when Gazzo is to realize that Rocky is like going on TV and so on and so forth. Like Gazzo gives Rocky like $500 to be able to get some boxing training, to like fight and whatever. And so Rocky's like, "Well, hey, are you gonna come to my fight?" And Gazzo's like, "Of course I will. Like of course." So like that's kind of really nice that it's like, hey, this guy is trying to like help Rocky out the best he can. Plus, who knows how long he's just kind of been like holding out money from Rocky for I don't know how long, anyways. Like, probably not paying him right, but Rocky didn't know any better, and plus, Rocky didn't complain. So, Rocky goes on and is, of course, to be trained by Mickey, and so Mickey is to say to Rocky, it's like, hey, like, women, women are gonna make your legs weak. Women are gonna make you weak. Like, hey, like, whatever you're doing, like, don't be doing the bedroom business with Adrian, like, until this fight is over. So we have Rocky, we have Adrian, and Rocky's complaining that he's so sore, and Adrian is kissing on him, and he's just like, no, not tonight, honey. Like I'm trading, I'm sorry. And so Adrian goes off, and she's kind of pouty, And so Rocky's like, I'm sorry. Like, no, I'm just like he's just so sore and just so run down, and his wife is to, of course, be getting out a whole new wardrobe, and is to just be like, hey, like have some like have some clothes that are kind of have you like look TV ready. So we have here Rocky going off to this meat packing plant and is going on to punch these these meat carcasses, or these cow carcasses that are hanging on these meat hooks in the slaughterhouse. So Rocky, it seems that Rocky is to be talking to Polly, and again Polly's asked, well, hey, that job with Gazo, like, hey, you wanna? So but Rocky's to still tell Polly, it's like, well, hey, like, no, you should be doing this job. Like, this job is a good job. So Polly just gets frustrated about working at this job, working at this slaughterhouse. And so Rocky just starts punching these meat sacks and just continues to just punch them. And Polly's like, hey, like, don't punch too hard. You're going to probably break the ribs. But all of a sudden, Rocky just starts to find out that, like, hey, like, maybe this could be a good way to train. Just start punching these things of meat hanging on these hooks. So, like, he does this in such of many times that a news reporter or a TV camera is to showcase this. And so Apollo, who is just kind of orchestrating all these deals to go and send these bouquet of flowers to these mayors and so on and so forth, like kissing babies and shaking hands and whatever, like as if he's running for office. Weirdly, we have Apollo's trainer that is to tell Apollo, like, hey, like, you should be catching this this whole, like, the way that Balboa is training. Like, he's beating the crap out of these, like, meat sacks. He's like training in a weird way. It seems like this guy has some heart. And so Apollo's just like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Like, I'll know how to train for this guy. Like, I'll know how to just, like, I don't need to go and watch that. Nah. So Mickey is training Rocky, and it's going well. And so let's get to the fight. Like, I think the only thing that I have probably left to cover is when Polly is to flip out, and is to mention that, like, he doesn't want anything from either Adrian or Rocky. And so let's get to that, because both Adrian and like Polly are to flip out at one another, and so Adrian is just to have enough with Polly. Like, he's like a burden to deal with anyways for any number of these films. But that's the good thing about this actor. These people become, like, difficult to work with. Um, Difficult to deal with, and there's always that kind of person possibly in your family. So Polly is to just kind of say that he doesn't need anything from Adrian, or he doesn't need anything from Rocky, and that he feels that Adrian owes him everything and so on and so forth. And so Adrian is like, I don't need anything from you. Like, I don't like I don't feel like I like need to owe you one, because Adrian is to also do a number of things, a number of chores that Polly doesn't do, like his laundry or his whatever. And so when he's not home, she takes care of a lot of things that he probably doesn't even think about. So Adrian is to kind of say that she wants to live with Rocky now because Paulie used to want to live alone. Paulie used to want to just live by himself. So, and I think that's the only big meaty part of this movie that I think is left to really say. So, let's get to the fight. Let's go on with that. Uh, so, Adrian is just going to be watching in the stands, watching this fight. So, Rocky is to get prepared for this fight, so is Apollo. And the interesting thing about this movie is like the first movie, I don't think they focus as much as the whole like training part of the movie, where in the later sequels they end up having to do this like absurd like training regiment and stuff because that's all they really have left to do because there's not a whole lot of story to go with like continuing to introduce a new fighter into the mix of things. So they have to have this like long stretch of preparing this fighter for his arduous process and challenge himself, blah 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 blah. So we get into this match, and so I really love the way, like the big grandiose like way that Apollo does these performances, where he uh, goes into here, and in this movie he's to be the Uncle Sam, just like I want you, I want you, I want, and like everybody's like yeah, like he has this massive hat on, and we have of course like a actual professional boxer coming in and shaking the hands of Rocky and Apollo Creed and like, hey man, you ducking me? Like, hey, Nan, no, you next. You're next. So we have them, of course, going on and doing this. And, like, it's kind of funny when Rocky is to go on and, like go through this match, like the intro of it, where he's just kind of mentioned about this robe and how it's, like, really massive on him, and so he has to have this like sponsor on the back of his robe so that way he can get some money out of it because he might as well, right? So Rocky is to go off and just like look at his opponent and just start rattling off some kind of funny things of like hey, like I wonder where he got that outfit from, or I wonder how he made all that, and so on and so forth. It's just kind of fun, like Rocky's commentary before the whole fight begins. So let's get into it. So we have this fight, and really the fight looks so weird because I can't even tell if these punches are actually landing or not. It's so weird. It just kind of feels like people aren't really hitting, and like people are kind of like pretending that they're getting hit. Like in the later parts of this match, like it looks like the punches are actually landing, but then again you're like no. It's just the way the camera is to be positioned. And so it's kind of interesting to see how goofily they try to do this kind of boxing match. When really looking at it in later boxing films, it looks better because it looks closer, it looks tighter. Like in this one, there's a lot of times where it seems that people are like, Paulo is to like punch Rocky, and Rocky is to do this like bob thing consistently. And so it just looks so goofy. But like there's some like body punches that seem to land or look like it lands, and like that's interesting. So we get the one point where Rocky is to be like having trouble sleeping before this match. He's to go off and see this stadium and to realize that they didn't even get his trunks color correct. That he is to have like white trunks and red stripes, and they have red trunks and white stripe. And so the fight promoter is to go to Rocky and be like, does it even matter? Like, will it even matter after tonight? Like, you're probably going to get killed, so what does it even really matter? And so Rocky is to go and sleep next to Adrian and just be like, you know what? Like, I'm not going to win this match. Like, I know I'm not going to win. But you know what? If I can just go the distance against Apollo, because no one has ever done that, like, I will hold my head up high after that. That I feel like I will, like, be a nobody then to everyone. That, like, I will have accomplished this. So, because again, we have Rocky, who is to be this guy who's to say that he's kind of a nobody from nowhere, and that no one should believe in him, that he's going to beat this guy because he can't even believe it in himself, that he's going to get anywhere close. So, but I like that whole moment where Rocky is sleeping next to Adrian, and he's having this whole inner monologue in his head, this whole, like, well, inner monologue that he, or let me he's having this speaking moment, talking to Adrian, thinking in his own head that there's no way for him to win, but he in his own mind has to come up with this way for him to feel good about this match afterwards, that there was no amount of training that Rocky could do to beat this guy, but we have to come up with Rocky thinking in his own mind what could be the equivalent of winning this match without literally knocking Apollo out here, or winning in the scorecard, that there has to be some other way to win here. So Rocky and Apollo are to fight this match, and so Apollo is guaranteeing that Creed will win in 3 rounds. Well, we go way beyond that. We have this Statue of Liberty woman who has to go through and rattle off all these numbers, all these numerous things. And so at one point we have Rocky in the early stages knocking Creed down, but Rocky notices that Creed gets right back up. So we do kind of have these back and forth spots where also Rocky is to be knocked back down, or to be knocked down, and Mick is just telling Rocky, like, stay down, like, just stay down. And so Rocky gets back up, and so Creed is like, all right, okay, all right, we're gonna have to we're gonna be here for a while. So, and we have those body shots that Rocky goes into with Creed that you're thinking, I'm like, okay, maybe this is the point where Rocky really does have a chance by these body shots that go into Creed's ribs. And so we have Rocky who's to force Mick to cut him, and because Rocky, I guess, can't see at this point. So we now go into here, and because also, like, Rocky's eyes are just swelled at this point. So we have this matchup, we have this fight, and so at the very end of it, both guys are to come up with a scorecard. And so Apollo is to tell Rocky, it's like, hey, there won't be no rematch. There won't be no rematch. And Rocky's like, I don't want one. No. Like Rocky feels that he did good enough. So now they come to a split decision scorecard where at the end of it, Apollo is to win. And so Adrian is to be yelling out for Adrian because that's all that matters to him. And so there's guys interviewing Rocky, and like Rocky is just kind of mentioning like, hey, there's not going to be a rematch, like with this. So Adrian is to go and run into the ring. Polly was also trying to get in the ring also, and one police officer was trying to like, hey man, like no, like you're not getting in here. It's like, hey, I'm a friend of the Rockies. I'm a friend of Rockies. I want to get in here. So Adrian runs into the ring, and so like we have the goofy moment where Rocky is to mention to Adrian like, hey, where's your hat? And Adrian is just like, well, hey, I'm here, I'm whatever. And so like with that said, like, did I thought Rocky was to scream, Adrian, I did it. But maybe that's a sequel film. Because here's the problem also. You have two movies where Rocky is to fight Apollo Creed, and there's numerous times where both Rocky is with Apollo Creed within this franchise of things. And, like, things start to blur into stuff because I've seen some of these Rocky movies so many times. But with that said, I think I'm gonna get the heck out of here because I know this is like a movie that's an hour and 50 some odd minutes, and I'm creeping up close to that. But I can have fun with this movie, but I also have problems with it. But I can also enjoy it. I can also have mixed feelings about it. But there's some good parts about this film. There's some enjoyable things about this film. And this is a long freaking review. I always feel bad where it's like, man, I feel like I can probably bust out like 45 minutes of this and I'll just be done. And I feel like I can like not overly analyze this and dissect it and whatever. And I think I'll be like gonna do this really, really good and really, really quick. And then like 2 years later, I'm like, oh, I didn't realize I took 12 years to do one video. Um, but anyways, for how much I could negatively speak about this film at some point, which I don't feel like I completely did that. Like, there, of course, is some annoying characters. Polly's annoying character, in all brutal honesty. Even the way of which the Rockies to speak in this film is technically annoying. But if it, like, when really looking at it, there's also a lot of times when Rocky is to have these really, like, oh, kind of moments where you're inspired to have this guy beat Apollo Creed, even though you're also just like, but man, like, I can also like Apollo Creed. He's a fun character. And plus, also, when you get to the point where Apollo Creed is to fight off Drago in another movie, you're just like, oh man, like, I'm freaking rooting for Creed, knowing full well that he's gonna get freaking clocked. And we go on to see what happens in that film, and you know what I'm talking about, especially if you've seen this whole entire franchise, because I'm sure you probably have. So, with that said, I think I'm going to get out of here. Um, some people may feel that I probably didn't get to anywhere into this review, which is perfectly fine. I tried to be as best as possible in the more middle of the road of this film, just because there probably is better Rocky films out there. So let me know in the comments below if you watched this whole freaking thing, which I appreciate. If, like, which Rocky movie that you like. Maybe you like the third Rocky movie. Maybe you've only seen one Rocky film and it's not the first one. Maybe you saw the Street Fighter Rocky movie and you only like that one. And so on and so forth. Maybe you like the Creed series. Maybe that's where you latched on to, and you don't care about any of the other Rocky Balboa films. Maybe you just saw Rocky Balboa and that's all that interested you. Whichever. With that said, I'm going to get the heck out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.